All right, so we got to go to follow-up. Let's do follow-up from last week. I will start. So one of my things was looking at the 36 questions from the Fast Friends procedure. And that Fast Friends procedure, which is very difficult to say quickly, actually has sort of been named differently. And now it's called increasing closeness. So if you look at it, and this is from the Greater Good Science Center, you look at it now, it's called 36 Questions for Increasing Closeness. And I looked at these, and I think these are a wonderful set of questions. I think they're an absolutely wonderful set of questions. You can easily see how going through some or all of these would really help you connect with whoever that you're connecting with, regardless of whether you would answer them the same or whether, you would answer them completely differently. You would learn a lot about the people. Some of them are like, intense is the wrong word, but I don't have a better word for it. Like some of them are like, oh wow, like that is a really deep question, right? I'm not so sure I'd feel comfortable talking to somebody about that. But overall, the 36 questions are really, really good. I recommend, I'll throw the link in the show notes. So if people want to check those out, they can go to the site at Berkeley, the Greater Good in Action site. Okay, my second one was to pay attention to throwaway identity comments, which I have noticed has actually been way easier than I thought it was going to be. So before, when I'm introing a conversation or I'm introing a point, I think about, okay, what phrasing am I going to use? And is that going to be a sign of identity that I'm forcing on somebody, or is that going to be a sign of identity that's going to bring us together? And I'm more strategic about that, which actually has been very good. So I'm glad that I threw that out there as an action item. And I've been thinking about this, and I want to keep thinking about this because I think when you do it well, it really makes that conversation effective, or it leads into that, the question or whatever you're trying to do, the point you're trying to make. And when you do it poorly, man, you can really step on somebody's toes and put your foot in your mouth when you're not thinking about it. So those are my two action items. Mike, what did you have for follow-up?
I had a couple which I didn't actually get a chance to take action on. One was use do you want to be, and then fill in the blank. It was heard, hugged, or helped. And Rachel and I just did not have a chance to really talk much about this. So that's kind of the final version of this action item is completed when I get a chance to actually explain how this works. And then if she's on board, we build this into, how we actually communicate. But we didn't have a chance to do that. We're recording this one. We had a little bit of a shorter window between the last episode and this one, and things have been absolutely bonkers for us. We had a couple of kids in a play, and was basically there all day last Saturday. Saturday is normally our day to do stuff together, and didn't really happen. So the other one was rephrase common questions to spark deep conversation, and I didn't have a chance to practice this one either. I haven't been in those situations. So I don't know. I don't think I'm going to carry this one over because I don't know when I'll actually be able to take action on this one, but I am thinking about that. I'm in those group settings. How can I kind of spark some deeper conversation? And by changing some of the common questions that they gave us, but I don't also want to create a template for these. I don't want to have like a list of these that I just go to. I feel like I can do this in the moment and it'll be just fine. I did check out the Netflix culture deck. So you shared the link to the part on the website where they have the current explanation of their culture. But I did actually find the old culture deck as well, which was honestly much more interesting.
Okay.
There's some really cool stuff in there, and it's a whole bunch of pages. I don't even know how many pages. It's got to be like 150 to 200 of 200 slides, and they have 7 different things that they kind of hit on at the top, and then they go into big examples and explanations of what they all are. Oh, there's 125, I guess. I just pulled it up. So there's the 7 aspects of their culture. Values are what we value: high performance, freedom and responsibility, context, not control, highly aligned, loosely coupled, pay top of market, promotions and development. Then they talk about how, like, just as an example, why I think this is so great. The very first section, many companies have nice sounding value statements displayed in the lobby, such as integrity, communication, respect, and excellence. Any idea where those are actually from?
So that would be those motivation signs, those motivation pictures.
No. Those were actually the ones that were on the wall in Enron. And so the next slide is like a picture of the Enron guy being led away to jail in handcuffs.
Wow.
So they're
Wow.
basically saying, actual company values as opposed to nice sounding values are shown by who gets rewarded, promoted, and let go. So like this is really cool in terms of setting the tone. But then I can also, just looking through this, see where things maybe went off the rails a little bit, because they talk about how, kind of what we mentioned in the last discussion, you just say the quiet part out loud. And they talk about in here, let's see, where is that section? About you don't want to be a jerk, essentially, but the way they frame it, it was it leaves the door open to the scenario that we saw, essentially. And they could have taken, a little bit harder stance on that. And it's kind of interesting to see the difference between these and the ones that are currently on the website. They are like very, very different, very ambiguous compared to the ones that are in this deck, which I think the deck is actually really good. There's just a few things that I would have probably changed a little bit. But yeah, like I think this is really great. I'll grab the link and I'll share this in the show notes for people who are interested in this. And I'll paste it in the chat here so you can take a look at it too, Cory, if you want. But I think there's a lot to be learned from looking at these, just modifying them a little bit to explicitly call out, like, there are certain things that you just cannot say.
Yeah. I was gonna ask you, like, how much modification do you think you would need to do to those? Like, you became the CEO of some big company. Like, how much modification would you do before you'd implement that? It's hard to quantify.
Well, I think the template is here. You have to figure out the actual values that you want. Those are the things that drive the culture. Like they kind of talk about that a little bit at the beginning of this deck. But then ultimately they're spot on in that, like, you want to make sure that you're living these out all the time. So you can't have a value that's this thing and then people act a certain way or they get rewarded for acting a different way. And that's, they're really good at giving explicit examples of that. So like they say, we want really high performing people on our team. And that's the culture, is they want this like excellence in performance. So they give examples. If you get consistent B-level results, but you put in A-level effort, you will get fired and given they call it a generous severance package, is how they frame it. You'll be given a generous severance package. If you get A-level results, but you don't put in very much effort, you will get promoted and rewarded. Like they actually say that in their culture deck. I can't find the specific spot. There's so much in here, but yeah, they talk about, there's a whole section on like brilliant jerks. So that's kind of where like they're starting to get into the scenario that we read about. But all they say is like diverse styles are fine as long as the person embodies the 9 values. So I think like that's where they need to go a little bit deeper, because you could say they embody the 9 values, but they still got raked through the coals because of something that legitimately they should have never said.
Yeah, exactly.
So
exactly.
Yeah, you just got to be a little bit more specific. But I think for the most part, it's the old version anyways is really good.
Awesome. I'm excited to look through it more. Thanks for sending the link over. All right, are you ready to get into today's book?
Let's do it.
All right, so today's book is called Why We Sleep, and it's by Dr. Matthew Walker. And he is a neuroscientist and a sleep scientist and has done a massive amount of research around the idea of sleep and dreams. And the book is broken up into 4 parts, and then a mini conclusion. And the parts are this thing called sleep, why you should sleep, how and why we dream, and then from sleeping pills to society transformed. Those are the 4 different parts. There are 16 total chapters in the book, plus a conclusion. and the conclusion's like 1 page, so it's real small. 16 total chapters, so maybe a little bit different than we've done other books on Bookworm, maybe not, but we're really going to talk about the parts, the 1, 2, 3, 4 parts. We're not going to go through every one of the chapters, and part of the reason why I want to lead the conversation in that way is because I think there are so many weeds that we could get lost in if we tried to do all 16 chapters, that I think it wouldn't be the best show that was ever produced, just because there's so many different roads we could go down. But two, I don't think the individual specifics are as interesting from this book as the general takeaways are from the book. So I think that's the way I want to lead the conversation today. He even says this in the very, very like intro section of the book. I should point out that you need not read this book in this progressive 4-part narrative arc. Each chapter can, and for the most part, be read individually and out of order without losing too much of its significance. And I would tell you that is 100% true. You could read these 16 chapters in whatever order you wanted to. They stand alone. They refer to research alone. He will refer back to other things that he's talked about in other chapters, but you wouldn't miss out, like, other than to like, oh, I want to read about that more, so I'm going to go back to chapter 2 and read what he wrote in chapter 2. So that's, I think, the direction I want to go. Mike, what do you have before we get into part 1?
Well, I think the sections are broken apart, maybe a little bit weird. Like there's a big emphasis in this book on how and why we dream.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that was a little bit strange. I guess, I was a little bit skeptical going into it that you could really dig too deep into how dreams are constructed. We'll get to specifics, I guess, when we get to that section. But the overall flow of it felt a little bit strange. I like, part 1 is obviously a deep dive into sleep itself, why you should sleep. As we talked about in the pro show with our evening routines, this is something that has been on my radar for a long time for personal reasons. When I was 18, I was diagnosed with epilepsy. I actually had a seizure while standing in line at a McDonald's. Fortunately, there was a nurse on site who turned me on my side, kept me safe till they were able to take me to the hospital, do the tests. And so sleep is one of the things that I pay very close attention to, because lack of sleep can be one of the things that triggers a seizure. So I am anxious to get to the discussion about that, because I'm curious. I've been disconnected long enough that I'm curious how that actually hit with you. And then the last part about society transformed, like it's in the section title, but it's such a small piece at the very end that it was weird to me. Like I wanted to get to that point, and I'm cranking through the pages. I'm at like page 250. Nope, not there yet. Page 280. Nope, not there yet. Page 300. Nope, not there yet. Yeah. Like, when are we going to get to the good stuff? But yeah, I mean, this guy, you look at his credentials. I think you actually said you looked up some talks that he had given or something like that. I didn't do that, but tons and tons of research go into this big, long appendix. He's done a lot of the studies himself, obviously knows what he's talking about. And that's kind of evident right from the beginning. Like, we're going to really go deep on this.
Yeah. Yeah, so I can't remember, Mike, if you and I talked about it or if I heard it somewhere else. So if it was you and I, call that out. But somewhere I had heard that, like, okay, when you're doing thinking work and creative work, you essentially gather all these resources and you think about all these things, but then you have these like working documents that have like active ideas on them. So you'll have this document that's like, oh, I want to write about creativity. So I have this creativity doc, but it's this gigantic working doc, and you're throwing resources in and pulling resources out, and you're linking to different things, and basically you're generating ideas within this like creativity doc. But you might have that doc, and then you might have a teamwork doc, and then you might have a sleep doc or whatever it is, and you have all these working docs around the topic that you care about. It's kind of what this felt like to me, right? So there was a binder that was called Sleep. Then there was a binder that was called Dreams. And inside of that binder, there was basically like the chapter headings, and that was a working doc. And then the chapters were all written and then it was brought back together into a book. Like that's the way I felt, like where it wasn't mapped out from the beginning. And maybe I'm wrong, but it wasn't mapped out from the beginning. This would be the flow of a book. It was, here are like 16 interesting ideas I have. And maybe there were probably 18 interesting ideas, but we're going to smush them into 16 chapters and we're going to write about them. Not necessarily bad in my mind, but that's the feel I got from reading it. So, all right, let's go ahead and move into part 1, this thing called sleep. Now, inside of part 1, there are 5 chapters. Okay, the chapter titles are To Sleep, Coffee, Jet Lag, Melatonin, Losing and Gaining Control of Your Sleep. Then chapter 3 is Defining and Generating Sleep, Time Dilation and What We Learned from a Baby in 1952. Chapter 4, 8 beds, dinosaurs, and napping with half a brain. Who sleeps? How do we sleep? And how much? And then chapter 5 is changes in sleep across the lifespan. So the titles of the chapters can be quite long because they'll have colons in them, and then they'll continue on there. So this whole thing is like basically we're trying to understand sleep. Like this is we're going to set the stage, we're going to set the foundation, we're going to try to understand sleep. So what I liked about this chapter was, as somebody who doesn't know much about sleep other than like, oh, they tell me I should get between 7 and 9 hours of sleep every night, but other than that, I didn't know much about the mechanics of it. I didn't know much about the research behind it. I didn't know much about any of that stuff. This was I thought pretty good part 1 was a pretty good overview of the different types of sleep and the different details of it. So that's my high level. I'll turn to Mike now, and then we can get more nitty gritty as we go.
Well, I'm kind of curious, what did you think of chapter 1 specifically? Because chapter 1 was sort of interesting in that it's a condensation, I would argue, of the rest of the book. He talks about the things that not getting enough sleep leads to, and then at the end of that, he talks about all the different benefits of sleep.
Would you go as far as to say it's like an executive summary? Or
I think that's fair, but it also feels weird being in the first section. I don't know. It's almost like an introduction.
That was the take I had on it. It was an introduction put into part 1, which I thought was strange. Like I thought if we'd have pulled that one out, it would have made a lot of stuff more like, and we'd have just called it the introduction before we got to part 1. It would have made a lot more sense.
Yeah, it's also probably as deep as many people will want to go on the topic.
Dear listener, I think you're going to get a theme here. If I'm reading Mike correctly, which hopefully I am, I think you're going to get a theme here that like the level of detail in some of these chapters is just egregious. I mean, it's like really, really intense, the level of detail and how much he goes into some of these studies. If you're into it, that's great, right? Like it's a really, I mean, you would just eat this book up. But if you're not into it and you're happy with the intro paragraph and then the conclusion paragraph, the rest of it just feels like, okay, like what are we doing here? We're just turning through. At least that was my take. On it.
Yeah, I think there's definitely room between as deep as he went and the summary that you get in chapter 1, but I don't know, like those are the two logical approaches. I feel is just give me enough to kind of understand why I should take this seriously and do something to optimize for it, and then there's Matthew Walker, who devoted his entire life to it.
Yeah.
If I were to try to condense this first section, like a couple of the important takeaways from this, I feel number one, this is a big deal. He talks about how insufficient sleep has been labeled a public health epidemic by the CDC. So take it seriously. There's the whole concept of the circadian rhythm, which is the 24-hour cycle for when you feel tired or alert at certain times. And that controls a lot of stuff, your moods, your emotions, your core body temperature, your metabolic rate. Your circadian rhythms will go up and down regardless of whether you sleep or not. And this is, the thing that kind of jumped out to me from the section on jet lag, because I'm getting ready to go to London, is like when you take someone out of a time zone and transfer them to a new time zone, it takes a while for your circadian rhythm to catch up. So it's not just it's bright out, I'm going to be awake. It's dark out, my body's produced melatonin, and now I'm going to sleep. It can really only adjust like an hour per day is
Mm-hmm.
kind of the guideline that he shared there, which was interesting. But there's also these visuals that go along with this. So there's like the process S and the process C, which are the two factors regulating sleep and wakefulness. The process C is the circadian rhythm, and then the process S is like the sleep drive. So if you've been up for a long time, your sleep drive is higher, and then the circadian rhythm, that different levels of alertness. Essentially, when these things are close together, then you're awake. When they're far apart on this graph, then you are asleep. There's really not much actionable from this other
No.
than recognizing that this is how it works. And then gets into like the whole idea of the sleep cycles. The sleep cycles are interesting. There's these different levels. I've been aware of these ever since I started using Sleep Cycle to track my sleep. Pro listeners got to hear all about my crazy evening routine and how I track my sleep and all that kind of stuff. But essentially, you go from being awake to REM sleep, which is basically where your brain is more active than it is when it's awake. But there's rapid eye movement sleep, and then below that, there's several stages of non-rapid eye movement sleep or deep sleep. And I kind of hate how these are all just broken down into non-REM sleep, stage 1, 2, or 3 and 4 are even grouped together. Like, what's the difference between these groups? We don't really know, other than like the deep sleep is kind of where all the restorative stuff really happens. And so this whole cycle from, I'm in REM sleep down to the bottom and then back up. It's not like you make these jumps. It's kind of like this slope. The whole thing takes roughly 90 minutes, which is why they say 8 hours of sleep, 8 hours of sleep opportunity time.
He uses that phrase a lot, doesn't he? Sleep opportunity. Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, because then your body will go through roughly 5 of those cycles, and that's really what you need. But then again, like, you can kind of go too far with this, I feel. I mean, if you're a new parent and there's nothing you can do about your kid waking you up in the middle of the night, you can look at your graph from Sleep Cycle and you can be like, I didn't get any sleep cycles. I'm going to die tomorrow. Like, no, that's not.
Yes.
And really, like, there's nothing you can do about that. You just do what you can with what you have and you let the rest of it go. So
I'm glad you did what you just did, because I was like, okay, I'm not quite sure how far Mike's going to want to take this. Like, how deep down these rabbit holes is he going to want to dive down in there? So I've got a pretty decent idea. So now I'm going to ask you a couple questions coming out of here. What kind of type are you? So from a circadian rhythm standpoint, are you a morning type? Are you, I forget the names of all of them, but are you the one that like is in the in between, or are you one that goes to bed late and then wakes up late?
Yeah, so there's morning larks. 40% of people are morning larks. 30% of people are night owls, and then 30% of people are in between. I'm not exactly sure. I'm probably in between. I can do the early morning stuff. When I started getting into writing online, that's what I was doing. I was getting up at 5 a.m. so I could write for an hour every day before I went into the office for the family business. I don't think I've ever really stayed up super late. I mean, in college, my bedtime was after midnight, but that's just the culture that you find yourself in. And when I go to bed now, I'm usually in bed by about 10:30. I want to be asleep by 11. I want to be awake by 7. So that's when my alarm goes off is 7 a.m. And I can force myself to get up earlier if I need to. I've been in different seasons of my life where I've like shifted my go to bed time and my wake up time to be earlier. But this is just kind of where it naturally lands. But that's also just not just for me, but just our family.
Yeah, family.
So you're not doing this in isolation. And I think if you were just going to try to like, I'm going to implement my circadian rhythm and everyone else just do whatever the heck you want, like that's not going to work. You got to get kids in bed. Otherwise they'll stay up all night. My 6-year-old is like, I'm not tired. As she's rubbing her eyes at 9:30, so like her bedtime's got to be before that. So I don't know. You have to, there's give and take with this.
Yeah. So, okay. I am clearly the morning type, where like I go to bed. If I could go to bed in my ideal situation, it'd be 8 o'clock, right? Like at 8 o'clock, I'd go start that sleep opportunity. But then I'd wake up at 4 a.m. and be completely fine. Like where I've found myself over the years is I will shift the go to bed time as needed based on family and based on like being in college and based on those things. But I'm not as good at shifting the wake up time. So it might go to 6 a.m., but it's usually not been later than 6 a.m. And then one of the things he talks about later on in the book is about how we try to like play catch up on the weekends. So it's like, that was always my philosophy. I was like, oh, okay, I'll just, I'll burn a 4 or 5 hour a night, during the week. And then I'll just sleep until, 9 or 10, in the morning on Saturday and Sunday. And that does not work. It never worked.
Does not work.
But I am clearly one of those early to bed, early to rise. And it's just ingrained in me. Like that's the way I've always been. And I like it that way, but kids, right? Like, so kids right now dramatically impact this because I can't go to bed as early as I want to. I just need to push that wake up time a little bit later. Cause right now I wake up, 4:30 pretty much every morning, and it's too early. Like I don't get enough sleep. So it's way too early.
I'm going to start calling you Jocko, by the way, with your early morning wake up times.
I just don't take pictures of like chalked workout gear, right? Like it's not really my style. So if y'all don't know, Jocko Willig will take pictures at like 4:30 every morning of his workout gear and put it on Instagram. Okay. So there's different types of sleep. Okay. Monophasic sleep, biphasic sleep, and then polyphasic sleep. So monophasic is basically we get one solid chunk of sleep, and typically it's in the middle of the night. So between the hours of 9 and whatever it might be, 6 a.m. Then there's biphasic sleep, which you get the long night sleep, but then you intentionally or also get like a 30 to 90 minute nap in the afternoon. Then there's polyphasic, where basically you just kind of randomly take little short sleeps throughout the day. I'm curious, what are you? Like, if you had your way, what would you do?
That's a good question. I'm primarily the monophasic sleeper. However, I have gotten into a routine of taking a nap on Sunday afternoons.
Just Sunday?
Just Sunday.
Okay.
Like we're at church most of the day Sunday, but we'll be there for AM service. We'll come home, we'll have lunch, and then I'll usually fall asleep on the couch, take a nap. But I don't know that I could do that every day. Maybe that's because I like coffee and I have too much caffeine in my system. I don't know. I will say that when the days that I do take a nap, usually I feel better during the day and have a little bit harder time falling asleep at night.
Okay. I would take a nap every day. Like every day around 1:30, maybe 2 o'clock. And it would go until whenever I woke up, right? Like I would 100% take a nap every day if I could take a nap every day. I love naps. I feel so much better when I take a nap. I have no idea if it keeps me up at night or not. I don't really care. Like I would take a nap every day. So I would 100% sit in this biphasic sleep pattern. I've actually thought about like, how do I change my schedule to where I do biphasic sleep? And I just haven't figured out actually how to do that. And then I also feel bad for my wife because she doesn't have that option. So if I took a nap every day, she'd be like, what are you doing? Like, what are you doing, guy? Okay. You mentioned the REM sleep and the non-REM sleep. I actually noticed myself getting annoyed by REM sleep and non-REM sleep as we read through the book. And I understand it's important, and I understand it's a fundamental piece of him writing this book. But like, I don't know. I just felt like we hit on the idea, or he hits on the idea of this REM sleep, especially, right? Like in this REM sleep dream thing, to where it was like, I kind of got this impression. I was like, okay, I get it already. Like REM sleep's important, right? Like, and I think the reason why he hits it so much, or he hits it so hard, is because if we're going to sacrifice our sleep, typically we sacrifice on the tail end of our sleep, which he would say, and the science would say, that's where we do a lot of our REM sleeping, our dream type sleeping. So therefore we lose that. And then in the very later, we'll get to in part 5, we'll get some of the impacts on that in terms of emotional stability and those things. And it has a dramatic impact on us. But I don't know about you. I was like, okay, stop. Like, just give me a break on the REM sleep, the REM sleep thing.
Yeah. In fact, the graph that he shows in chapter 3 about the different cycles, you can kind of see in the first cycle, you go all the way down to the deep sleep for an extended period of the cycle. And then the amount of time that you spend in that stage 3 and 4 level gets shortened with each subsequent cycle. The last one, you don't really go down into 3 or 4 at all. And that's the one where you spend 2/3 of that cycle in the REM sleep.
Mm-hmm.
So you're right that it is the one that gets compromised if you cut your sleep short. But the other thing, and I think the reason that he just keeps talking about it so much is I think it's in this beginning section. He talks about how this is not something that every living being does. There's a lot of animals that don't actually have REM sleep. I forget which ones specifically do, which ones don't. But it's sort of a distinctly human thing. And then there's a whole bunch of benefits that come from it. Now, again, the question is like, okay, what do I actually do with this?
Mm-hmm.
Try to get as much sleep as you can. And then if you don't get as much as you wanted, like, don't beat yourself up about it, but just try to control your environment the best that you can. He does have in the very back of the book, the appendix, the 12 tips for healthy sleep.
Pause on those. Let's do those at the very end. I want to do this at the very end. Yeah.
Yeah. That's essentially a summary of, what you can actually do with the information that he shares here. And then the first 340 pages are largely, hey, this is bad for you. Hey, this can kill you. If you don't do this, then you're going to die. And then by the end, it's like, I have a dream, and he paints this utopian picture of life where sleep is important to everybody.
Yep. All right. I have one more for you before we move on to part 2. Briefly, what would your ideal sleep schedule be? Or like sleep pattern, sleep schedule? Like what would the perfect dream world ideal sleep be?
I think I'm pretty close to it. It's in bed by 10:30 and I'm up at 7. And I think the thing that I wish was different is like just sharing that. I feel a little bit of shame in that I get up at 7. Like some people will be like, well, my kids are on the bus at 5:30, so aren't you fancy? And I think like that's kind of his point, is like it shouldn't be that way. But the question really is just like, what is the right thing for you, and get as close to that as you can. And I don't think it's really that hard.
Yeah.
So this is a long way of answering the question, but essentially, like, I think I'm pretty close to living it, and I would encourage everybody to try to figure it out for themselves too, because it should be a lot more attainable than you may think.
So I hope I can get to your point where I'm comfortable and like happy with my sleep schedule. My ideal, like I told you, would be 8 to 4, so 8 p.m. to 4 a.m. I love the morning, like before everybody else wakes up. I love that time. So, if I can get 2-3 hours in the morning of protected time, man, like it's just glorious to me. But then I want to take a solid nap, like 1:30 to 2:30, like every afternoon. I want to cot in the corner of my office, and I want to take a nice nap every afternoon. All right, cool. So let's go to part 2. So part 2 is why you should sleep. There are, let's see, 1, 2, 3 chapters in part 2. So the chapters are what your mother and Shakespeare knew, the benefits of sleeping for the brain, too extreme for the Guinness Book of World Records, sleep deprivation in the brain, and then cancer, heart attacks, and a shorter life, sleep deprivation, and the body. So basically, we take a turn here, right? In my mind, like, so we set the foundation in part 1, and as Mike alluded to before, we kind of take a turn here where we start to talk about like, hey, you're gonna die, right? And if you don't sleep well, you're going to die faster, and you're going to die worse, and like we all the effects of poor sleep and all of the negative aspects of poor sleep. So I'm just going to read off, some of the negative effects just to kind of give us an overview as we work through this. So basically, your memory and your learning take a significant hit in terms of if you're sleep deprived. So all of this is basically if you're sleep deprived. Okay, so mastery takes a hit. Injury prevention, quicker recovery takes a hit. Creativity takes a hit. Your drowsy driving. So he calls out the fact that he has this huge section on drowsy driving, and basically it's equivalent to drunk driving, and you're gonna die basically because you're essentially falling asleep at the wheel, but you're doing it in a way where you're like sleep paralyzed, where it's different than drunk driving where you just react slower. You actually are going through sleep paralysis during that. What else? So he's got all these different things. Emotions swing heavily, so you're more emotionally reactive. Then he links it to Alzheimer's and the fact that we get these diseases and cancer through sleep deprivation, and we've got weakened heart, we've got high blood pressure, we've got calcification of the arteries, less growth hormone, diabetes, obesity. So he's got all these things. So all of that is like the overview of chapters 6, 7, and 8. I have written here, sleep 8 hours a night, I think 3 times, right? Like, so, and it's not that he said it, but it was basically sleep 8 hours a night, sleep 8 hours a night. Cory, you need to sleep 8 hours a night, right? Like I have that multiple times throughout this section. And we said this before, but let's just really call it out one more time. All of this stuff is backed up by scientific research. So he's not, like, I never got the impression once that he's like a fearmonger or he's trying to do this to like, excite you in a negative way or to get attention or anything like that. He's literally like looking at the research, in a lot of different research and saying, we've got a lot of evidence here that lack of sleep deprivation, both in quality and quantity, is really detrimental to the human body. And it's really detrimental to the human mind. And we need to think about this and take this seriously. So in my mind, I took this as hey, be shocked and awed about all the stuff that can actually happen if you are sleep deprived.
Yeah, he's not looking at the research, he's doing the research.
Yeah.
He doesn't have in the back of the book a link to the studies that he's done. Maybe they're just not published and he couldn't link to them that way, or maybe there's just too many to link to. But almost every chapter, I don't know, there's like a dozen different studies that he's mentioning, because he's not diving deep into them. He's like, I did this study with this person to test this hypothesis, and this is what we found. And so even though like in this section, like you said, he's explicitly saying these are the bad things that come with a lack of sleep, it's prevalent throughout the entire book, where it's like, so if you go back to REM sleep, we were talking a lot about that, what are the effects of not doing this? And then they would figure out a study, and then they would put people through the study. And most of the studies, he even like has a caveat. It's like they volunteered for this study, so we don't get in trouble. That sort of thing. It's a very negative tone, but again, like I don't blame him for that. I blame the culture for that, where it's just not normal to prioritize sleep and rest, even though, as he talks about later in the book, there's significant costs that come along with that. I do like chapter 6 from this section. Before we get into, Guinness Book of World Records doesn't even track this anymore because it is so harmful to people. Like it's too great a risk for the individuals to put themselves through this. And he makes the point, and they do track like the longest freeform fall from miles up in the sky.
Yes.
Like that's fine, but staying awake for too long is not. So I don't know. But there's a section, chapter 6, about your mother and Shakespeare knew. There's a couple things from here that I liked. One of them was the story about the piano player. And probably I like this because it kind of gets into how creativity works and skill development, things like that. But there was this piano player who was trying to learn this passage of music, and they kept messing up when they were practicing in a particular spot. But then they went to bed and they woke up in the morning and they could play it. And I grew up playing classical violin, and like all the fancy Vivaldi's Four Seasons, stuff like that. I know exactly what that's like. There's these passages that you got to learn to play because you're playing it with the orchestra. And the harder you try, once you get to a certain point, the less progress you make. And you just get frustrated because I can't play this thing. And then you go to bed and you wake up and you come back the next day when you're fresh, like, oh, I can do this.
Yeah.
And it feels really weird. But I think, not that there's an action I'm associated with this, but if there was, it would be where's the balance between the effort that I put in to develop the skill while I'm awake and then just getting enough sleep and letting it's almost like a two sides to a coin. Like you have the focused intentional effort that books like Peak talk about, 10,000 hours to master a skill, stuff like that. The focused practice, but then another aspect of that is how well are you sleeping at night? And I feel like you have to consider those together. But they really are important for high performance. And that's illustrated by the other thing I really like from this section was they mentioned the sleep study with Andre Iguodala. And this is not the first time I heard about this, but this was really interesting. I don't know if people who are listening to this now know who Andre Iguodala is or was. He was an NBA player. I think he's retired now. He was with the Golden State Warriors, Philadelphia 76ers. He was kind of like a perennial all-star caliber player for most of his career. And then he went through this sleep study and they found that increased sleep led to an increase of 29% in the points per minute that he was able to score. His 3-point percentage goes up. His free throw percentage shows up. Decreased sleep leads to a 37% increase in turnovers, 45% increase in fouls committed. I mean, like it's probably common knowledge at this point with like the superstar athletes, but you really need to make sure that you're getting enough rest if you want to be able to perform at that level consistently.
Yeah. I mean, I like how you put it in terms of it's not like the tone he writes in is not negative. It's more, I'm driving home this main point. Like I'm really driving home this point. I like the phrase that he makes to the piano player. Practice with sleep makes perfect, right? Because you always hear the practice makes perfect, and it's like practice with sleep, like with good sleep makes perfect. And I really like that. I think my action item, not really that it's going to be one of mine at the end, but like one of the actions coming out of this for me is, let's say I want to learn to code or I want to learn to play an instrument or a language or something like that. I think there's a lot of value in doing that and then doing it before sleep and getting good sleep. And I think you'll see advances in that. And I would love to, I almost want to do like a self-study where I'm trying to learn something and I intentionally like do it before I go to bed. And then I try to, get a good night's sleep and then see if I'm better at it in the morning than I was before I went to bed. The last thing really that I want to hit on in this, I mean, I guess if you're going to read this book and you want to be very strongly encouraged from a physical health standpoint, read chapter 8. Chapter 8 is called Cancer, Heart Attacks, and a Shorter Life, Sleep Deprivation in the Body, because he goes through all of these different things and talks about how lack of sleep impacts, or good sleep impacts, right? Like, and he talks about certain ones in certain ways, but how lack of sleep impacts, these different things. I want to call out, though, that in chapter 7, he gives maybe the best case for non-REM sleep, right? So, and that is the fact that non-REM sleep fights cancer and dementia, that it helps clear out, the beta amyloids or whatever it is out of the brain from dementia and Alzheimer's, and that it actually lets your body produce and filter these natural killer cells through your bloodstream and into your system. That way it kills cancer cells. So it's like I think that is the strongest play he gives for non-REM sleep. And then most of the rest of the book is about REM sleep. So anything else on part 2 before we move to part 3, Mike?
Well, one thing that kind of stood out to me, he mentioned this in chapter 1 as well, but the less you sleep, the more you are likely to eat because it messes with your regulatory chemicals. And this was one of the aha moments for me, I think, was that there's this hormone leptin, which tells you that you're full. And then another hormone, ghrelin, is the hormone that triggers a strong sense of hunger. And so when you don't get enough sleep, you basically have this sense that you're hungry, like that one gets amplified. And then the one that tells you that you're full gets diminished. Yeah. So I don't know. I've definitely, hearing that understanding kind of made me realize, I definitely fall into that sometimes where it's like, I do feel tired today and I didn't go for a long run or anything, but I still just can't stop eating. Like, what's wrong with me?
I agree. All right, so let's move into part 3. So part 3 is how and why we dream. Now, I'm going to give away the farm on this one, Mike. I was not, I did not like most of this section, right? Most of part 3 was like, okay, fine, like this is okay, this is good. But like, so it's 3 chapters. It's chapter 9, chapter 10, chapter 11. Routinely psychotic. This is chapter 9. Routinely psychotic REM sleep dreaming. Chapter 10 is dreaming as overnight therapy. And then chapter 11 is dream creativity and dream control. The one I liked the most was dream creativity and dream control. That was the chapter I liked the most out of this. But overall, like, was just not into this section. I just didn't get it. So you're shaking your head no. You agree? I mean, I assume you agree with me.
Yeah, I agree. Like, there's only so much to be said about this, I feel. So he makes a strong argument at the beginning, I feel. Like, he talks about how when we dream, we're acting like someone who is psychotic, we're hallucinating, we're delusional, we're disoriented, we're effectively labile, and we deal with amnesia when we wake up. So, okay, you have my attention, but then, like, once you understand how this works, that's kind of interesting, I guess. There's really not a whole lot you can do to control this. Like, what do I do with this information? I think the one thing that I liked about this and the kind of takeaway was I've heard from for a long time people advocating reading fiction at night because it helps them fall asleep. But in the dream creativity and dream control section, they talk about people who kind of got aha moments after they fell asleep, and they were basically dealing with problems that they couldn't solve before bed. So that kind of goes against that advice, I feel. A lot of the nonfiction books that I read, I like reading them because they are speaking to a problem that I'm trying to solve, or I'm trying to wrap my head around how something actually works. A lot like Dmitry Mendeleev, which was the story in here that I like the best about the Russian chemist who invented the periodic table of elements. Now, he had not slept for 3 days prior to this, so don't do that. But he was struggling with how these elements could fit together somehow, but he couldn't figure out how to do it. So then he finally falls asleep. He has this dream. And what was astounding to me from that was that he got this whole big picture of how this stuff all fit together, and there was only one correction that he had to make afterwards. That's pretty astounding. But then also, this is kind of linked to how I traditionally felt about creativity. I've shared this other places, even in the reading masterclass, talked about how at one point I said, I guess I'm just not creative because other people seem to get these flashes of inspiration, like the entire periodic table of elements that shows up in a dream, and they know how this fits together. But I don't experience it that way. I try some things, I learn some things. My big revelation was that when you create something new, you're connecting dots that haven't been connected before, so collect better dots. And this is an application of that, I would argue. What he doesn't get into detail here is how much information he was collecting and just thinking about in terms of all these different elements. So I think it's kind of cool to see how you can, using sleep and dreaming, that can help click those things into place. But you really can't count on that other than to make it part of your regular routine. So again, control what you can control, and then the score will take care of itself.
Well, and I would think that he would say, by setting yourself up, right? Like, so doing all the front end work when you're awake and then giving yourself a good sleep opportunity, you give yourself the ability to go into these dream states. Not that you can control it, or not that you can like have any kind of, regulation of it. But at the same time, if you give yourself that opportunity, there's a chance a higher chance that these things will come out of it. And I think that's he never says that, but I think that would be a legitimate claim to say, set yourself up well, and then give yourself the time to actually get into dream state, which, going back to the point we made before, if there's going to be a thing that we cut out, we cut out this REM dreaming, this REM, dream state. So therefore he's trying to, I think, make a push for that. I liked the fact, and I thought it was really, intellectually honest of him. I mean, the very beginning of chapter 9, he basically says, hey, we can't interpret dreams. Nobody can interpret dreams, right? Like trying to interpret dreams, that's silly, right? Like, and he kind of calls it out. And he said, he's like, you can try, like, think about it, see what it does for you. He's like, but really, you're not gonna, you're not making any major insights there. I liked the idea of these dreams decoding waking experiences, and he links it to that the REM sleep or the dream sleep will basically allow us to emotionally tune. And the way he describes emotionally tune, I thought was awesome. So he says the level-headed ability to read the social world around people, like so the level-headed ability to read the social world around you. And what I can tell you is that if I've had a good night's sleep, I can't link it to dreaming, but if I've had a good night's sleep, I'm just more level, right? Like I'm more level all around. Like so, crazy things happen at work or with my family or whatever it is, it just doesn't hit me as dramatically or as emotionally swingy when that happens. So there's some at least anecdotal evidence there from my my own life. I really liked the examples of the creativity that came out of dreams. He references you talked about the periodic table, but then he talks about the Beatles, McCartney
Yep.
writing songs, and then Keith Richards for the Stones come up with songs. I want to ask you this. Do you dream frequently?
I don't think that I do.
Okay. Because I don't either, right? Like, I mean, I very rarely, and they say we dream all the time, we just don't remember them.
Yep.
But it's like I very rarely remember a dream, like where I wake up and I'm like, oh yeah, that was a dream.
Yeah, almost never.
Yeah. And usually when I do, like when I come out of a dream, it's like a weird dream. Like I wake up and I'm like, man, that was strange. Like it's never one of these like, oh, I got the song lyrics for, the chorus to this awesome song in my head. It's more a matter of like,
Yeah.
man, the weirdest thing happened, and like for some reason the house was upside down, but we weren't, and like it's like something.
I was
something
being chased by
like
a piece of pizza.
exactly, exactly. Do you know people, or has anybody in your circle? I'll just say immediate circle or broader circle, sleepwalkers?
No, not that I know of.
My one son is a sleepwalker, so like
Oof.
he'll randomly come out. It doesn't happen like all the time, but he'll randomly come out, and you're like, "Hey, are you okay?" And he just like kind of stares at you, and then you like have to encourage him to go back to bed, and then you ask him the next morning, and you're like, "Hey, did you know you came out and talked to us?" And he's like, "Nope, had no idea." And I was like, "Okay, that's great." That's
Well,
great.
I guess something like that happens every once in a while with our kids, but I think that happens more frequently in kids he talks about
Yeah.
in this book. I don't remember if it's this section or in the next section, but we had one just the other night, actually. So I mentioned last Saturday, we had two kids in this play production. There were multiple performances on Saturday. My one son, who is 12, first time he's been in a production like this, he had a minor part with a few lines that he had to recite, and then a couple of songs that they were choreographed that they were doing on stage. And he walks out. We had been and I mentioned at the very beginning, we've been watching basketball. I'm a big basketball fan. So every night, playoffs around, we're watching basketball. And I don't know if that's the night that the Lakers were playing or not, but he walks out of his room at like 10:30, and he's like, "What were the two songs that I have to do with LeBron James?" Like, what are you talking about? And then he's kind of out of it. He goes back to bed. In the morning, we asked him, like, "Hey, did you know that you asked us about these songs you were going to sing with LeBron James?" He's like, "What? No, that's ridiculous." Like, no, it's true.
That's awesome. That's awesome. All right, we'll move to part 4. So part 4 is from sleeping pills to society transformed. And as Mike alluded to before, we are going to cover kind of a broad range of things, and it's going to then not hit as nearly as well as he wanted to, and I'll agree with him on that, on the transformation of society thing. But there are, let me count real quick, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 chapters here, and then like a mini conclusion. So you have things that go bump in the night, sleep disorders and death caused by no sleep. That's chapter 12. Chapter 13, iPads, factory whistles, and nightcaps. What's stopping you from sleeping? Chapter 14, hurting and helping your sleep, pills versus therapy. Chapter 15, sleep and society, what medicine and education are doing wrong, and then what Google and NASA are doing right. Chapter 16, a new vision for sleep in the 21st century. And then the conclusion was also considered to be part of, I would consider it to be part of chapter 4 because it's one page.
Yep.
So I'll start off. Chapter 12. I hope you don't get mad at me, Mike. I didn't read chapter 12. I skimmed it. I looked at it. I went through the headings and I went, nope. Just like, because I read the intro paragraph and I was like, okay, sleep disorder, sleep disorder, sleep disorder. And I was like, and now he's going to go do what he's done on the last 11 chapters. And he's going to go to an insane amount of detail about this sleep disorder. Right. And I'm like, I just don't have it. Like, I'm not going to read about all of these sleep disorders. But what I do want to comment on is, have you ever heard anybody tell a story about sleep paralysis? Or have you ever heard of it before?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. And I can't remember if he talks about it in this chapter or not, but it's like he talks about it in the very beginning of the book about this concept of sleep paralysis. Basically, you are awake mentally, but you can't do anything physically. Like, so you can't move, you can't do anything. And it sounds absolutely frightening. Like, absolutely frightening. Like, you have this thing, you like say, I want to move my hand, and your hand just doesn't move. Or I want to get out of bed right now. Or I want to yell at you, and I can't do any of that stuff. And maybe that's why I didn't want to read sleep disorder chapter, because it like makes me nervous and uncomfortable. So I freely admit that. I liked the chapter 13 because I thought this one was more actionable. And, so that helped me out a little bit in terms of, he talks about electric and LED light. He talks about regularized temperature, caffeine, alcohol, and then essentially working and setting alarms and punching the time clock. And I thought that one was a good actionable one, and a needed actionable one as we got towards the end. Then he goes into, it seems as though, and again, it's not evidence-based, but he seems like he has a pretty big vendetta against sleeping pills, right? Like, he is not a big fan of sleeping pills and using kind of that form to help yourself get to sleep. Then we get into, I really like the chapter 15 where he ties it into the workplace and lost productivity and then education. Not surprising, I work in that space, so therefore that was a more interesting one to me. And then I was very underwhelmed by the 21st century chapter, right? The chapter 16, where he tries to talk about how we can transform society. I wanted more. I wanted much more there. And I don't know if he was trying to not be too shoot for the moon kind of thing, but I wanted a lot more in there. So that's my overview on part 4.
Yeah, so let's go back to the beginning here with chapter 12. I agree, I didn't really care for this section, but there were a couple insights that stood out to me from this. Number one, he's talking about insomnia and how a lot of people think that they deal with insomnia and they really don't. Insomnia is having inadequate ability to get good sleep while giving yourself adequate opportunity to get sleep. So this is where he talks about time slept not being the sleep opportunity time. And the sleep opportunity time is the thing that you can really control. The rest of it, I think, is a lot of environmental. So put yourself in the best position that you can, but don't really worry about that a whole lot, I think. And then in the chapter 13 about the iPads specifically, you mentioned that you read on your iPad. That's why I was shaking my head at you at the beginning. Using an iPad for 2 hours before bed reduces melatonin by 23%. Melatonin being the thing that helps you to fall asleep. So I don't know, there's probably things that you could do about that, but essentially what he's saying here is that, yeah, blue light is real. And it kind of bugs me when I hear people talk about that and they're like, I don't think this is a real thing because I don't struggle with it. And really in my back of my mind, I'm thinking, well, you just are so exhausted that you fall asleep. You're not getting the quality sleep that you really need because you're not measuring all this other stuff. But you're so exhausted by the end of the day that you can just pass out after looking at a phone for a couple of hours. And that's actually a bad signal, not a good signal.
Okay, I want to pause you here because I really want your input on this.
Okay.
And the reason why I really want your input is because I've actually thought about this and I don't have a good solution. So I'm hoping you have a good solution for me. I agree with you. I think I would benefit from reading paper books. But the way I take notes on the books and the way I want to capture those things, I don't have a good mechanism, and I'm not the kind of guy who's going to go back through all of my notes that I wrote down in that paper
Yeah.
book and then organize those into some system. So, Mike, solve my problem for me. Like, what do I do here? Because I've got a really good system right now where I've got a mind map and I've got a book up on the iPad, and it's like
Yeah.
real clean. Like it's very very well structured for me. How do you do it? Like, because I mean, because you put notes in. I heard you talk about this before, right? You've talked to me about this before. You put
Hmm.
you do the mind map on your phone, don't you?
I do. Yeah. So I'm grabbing my phone to jot down a note, but then I'm immediately putting it back down. I'm not even locking it a lot of times afterwards. So the time that it's in my hand is not it's not that much. And I'm not ever doing anything besides just taking the notes. And I take notes every couple of pages usually. If there's a lot of stuff, then it's more frequent, and I will go through a portion of the book a little bit slower because I want to extract more from it. But for the most part, I'm only capturing the things that really resonate with me. I think there are ways around that if you really wanted to. So you could just be like I am. It's okay to grab my phone every once in a while and capture some notes. You don't have to use MindNode for that. You could also, like I know Readwise has a thing where you can take a picture of the section in a book and highlight it, and then you can pipe it off wherever you want automatically. That's an option too. In the reading masterclass, I talked about how Sean Blanc has this method he picked up along the way. I forget the original person who did this, but it's like a personal book index. So you make a highlight in the book, and then in the back of the book, you tag it essentially. So you have these different sections, and then you put the page number of the highlight. And then when you're done with the book, you could go just grab those highlights, bring them over into a different app if you want to have a digital version. That again feels like more work. If you really wanted to avoid the blue light and you wanted the digital workflow that you're describing, I would get an e-ink Android tablet. I actually have one of these. It's a Onyx Books Tab Ultra, and it can run Obsidian. It can do all sorts of crazy stuff in addition to taking handwritten notes, which is kind of the reason that I got it. I had a Remarkable previously, and then I got this Android tablet. The problem with that is that you're not going to have MindNode, which is a deal breaker for me. There are other apps, like XMind is a pretty good mind mapping tool, and that's available on the Google Play Store. So, I mean, if I were starting from scratch today, I might actually do that. But I have 190 MindNode files. Like, there's a lot of sunk costs there, and my workflow is working. So, why try to change it?
Yeah. Well, and will MindNode, sorry, not to get on nerd corner, but will MindNode import an OPML? Like if I would do
Mm-hmm.
an outline, will it import it and then make it into the MindNode file?
Yeah, so you can, let's see, I have my note open right now because I'm looking at my notes for Why We Sleep as we work through this. Let's see, is there an
I
import
don't s- I
feature?
don't see import. Maybe open and it'll just accept.
That would be my guess, is that you could open OPML inside of MindNode and then
It'll convert
with
it.
MindNode, and then it would just create the thing from it. I know you can export as OPML from
Okay.
MindNode. That's one of the 4 different formats that I have for all my notes inside of the community.
Okay. I'll probably send you a text message later to remind me of the name of the tablet that you have. So this may be a fun
Sure.
little trip down that lane. Okay. So let's get back to part 4, where we're talking about kind of how we transition and do different things. It's just a little more actionable. I
Oh,
liked.
right.
Yeah. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
actually, just to pick up there before we got derailed, I wanted to mention from chapter 14, the hurting and helping your
Okay.
sleep.
Okay.
Essentially, the big takeaway from this is this cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia being the best option. And those things that he jotted down under that section are essentially the 12 things that are in the appendix. But this is all like environmental design and things that we talked about in the pro show with the evening routines. Like, do what you can with this stuff. And then you can't just like force yourself to go to sleep. The harder you try to fall asleep,
Yep.
sometimes the less you're able to fall asleep. And eventually your body just gets to the point where it's like, okay, I'm going to do this now.
Yeah, exactly.
But you can't really do anything in order to get it to that point other than the chemical stuff, which you talked about, the sleeping pills, which don't actually get you to the deep sleep stuff. He talks about how those sleeping pills and alcohol are both sedatives. So they'll
Yes.
help you like fall asleep, but you're really just sedated. You're not getting the restorative benefits of the full sleep cycle.
I was really glad he made this point. Like this is one of the key takeaways. It's like these, as with most things that'll, they get not get rich quick, but you know what I mean, like the easy button, right? Like as most things are easy button, you're not actually sleeping, you're sedated. And it's like, oh, that's such a clear vision in my head. It's like you think you're sleeping, but you're not really. Like you're just numb to the rest of the world. This made me think of my one boy. He'll always come out and he'll be like, "Dad, I can't sleep." And I'm like, "Son, well, you haven't tried. You've only been in your room for like 30 seconds." And he's like, "Yeah, I know,
Yeah.
but I want to sleep now." And I'm like, "Well, you got to set the conditions right. You got to lay there and you got to, And he doesn't have it. But I just think that's pretty funny. One of the parts of this from chapter 13 that I hadn't realized, and he formalized it more, was the idea of temperature.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason why this kind of rang so true with me is because I've noticed this, but I've never tied it back to temperature. So you go on a long run too late at night. Well, then you have a hard time falling asleep. And he would say that's because your temperature is too high. Your core temperature is too high and you need more time to like lower your core temperature. Or if this is the problem I have with weighted blankets. So in the pro show, you talked about having the weighted blanket. I love the weighted blanket, but I'm too hot. It typically will make me too hot if it's not winter, if it's not the winter months. And even then, sometimes I get too hot. So, he recommends taking like a hot bath or hot shower or heat on your hands and feet to kind of disperse the heat prior to getting into bed. I like that a lot. He goes on this pretty good, anti-campaign against alarm clocks and how it spikes your blood pressure, and then when you hit snooze, it spikes it and spikes it and spikes it and spikes it. It's just really bad for your heart. So that was convicting, and which I kind of liked that idea. I just don't know if I can get on board with the whole caffeine thing. I'm sure there's a lot of good scientific evidence, but this is one of those situations where I'm not sure how much scientific evidence you need to present to me. Like it's going to be really hard for me to not do the caffeine thing. We both homeschool, right? So therefore it's different for us. But this is something that when I taught K-12 and then even seeing it now with college students, the shift towards a later schedule, like starting later in the morning and rolling through. So we have two major problems. Is if I teach an 8 a.m. class, students are super tired when they come into that class. I mean, they're really, unless you have that one student who will get up at 4 or 5 in the morning and then like work out and then come to class, they're super tired. But the other thing is we see this, and I forget what he called it. It's the para something dip in the afternoon. It's got a technical term, but it's this dip around between 1 and 4 p.m. And we see that a lot too. So it's like if I teach a class between 1 and 4 p.m., there'll be certain students who are just like completely dipped. And he talks about how if we would shift this time window to be a more favorable time frame for the circadian rhythm. And he talks about it mainly in high school, but I think it's true. I would say it's true in college students too. Man, like I would love to run a full-scale demo where we don't teach a class before 10 a.m., or 9 a.m., and we just see how it goes. And the reason why we don't do that is because the faculty, who are older people, want to not teach until 6 at night or 7 at night. We want to be done earlier than that. But I really think we would see a lot more benefit from an educational standpoint if we would shift that schedule back even further. Colorado's done it. Like there are quite a few schools where, especially the high school kids, I mean, they don't start until 8:30 or 9 o'clock, which he talks about in the book. But it's a really interesting concept to me, and I would love to do like a full scale experiment where it's a later morning thing.
Yeah, that was a aha moment for me too, was that the circadian rhythms of kids and teenagers specifically is different, and made me appreciative of the fact that we homeschool, we can adjust those start times, because he basically talks about how when you have teenagers, I've known for a long time about like the target amount of hours for kids at different stages, and teenagers do need more sleep than adults, but also their circadian rhythm is a bit delayed, which is why they tend to want to stay up later. So they're staying up later, and it's not just the fact that they want to be rebellious or, they're too attached to doing whatever they're doing. Like they're just not tired yet.
Yeah.
But the parents are like, well, I'm exhausted, so you better go to bed. And then, they're sleeping in because they're laying in bed, not able to fall asleep probably. And their circadian rhythm is telling them, oh, you're going to get up at 9 a.m. instead of 7. So mom and dad are getting frustrated. Like I remember a story, my brother-in-law telling me about how on a Saturday, his dad would make sure that he was like vacuuming outside the hall outside his bedroom at like 7 a.m. in order to get him up. And I realized like, yeah, that's not the right way to do it. Now, obviously you don't want, I don't know, I guess maybe you can make the argument if they're teenage night owls, then maybe they should be allowed to sleep until noon.
Yep.
I don't know. But I feel like, not that we were ever super strict about, you're going to get up at this time anyways, but I feel like it's a little bit more lax. But also, again, like the thing we're trying to communicate to our kids by homeschooling is essentially you don't need to punch the clock. You don't need to have the seat time. I mean, if you're trying to get a specific degree, you want to be a doctor or a teacher, you need the letters after your name, you need the certificate on the wall. That's a different thing. But in terms of doing quality work, how much you work doesn't really
Yes.
matter. So let's learn how to self-regulate. Let's learn how to manage ourselves, manage our time, manage our energy, manage our emotions in a way that allows us to do as much good as possible. And I feel like this is very much in line with that.
Yeah. The another one that stood out to me in this section was the asking your doctor before surgery how many hours of sleep they had the night before, and if they're like 4, and you're like, nope, I'm good today, I'm not gonna have the surgery today. And I was like, this is just not realistic. Like it would be amazing if you could actually do that, but then they're gonna be like, okay, well, we'll reschedule your surgery for 6 months from now, and it's like, well, can't really do that. So I thought that one was a fun one. I laughed a little bit at that. Then there's a whole section here about sleep in the workplace and how there are negative consequences if we are underslept from a work standpoint, from being less charismatic, from being less efficient, less productive, and then actually making poor ethical decisions. So all this was good. We get to chapter 16, and basically he offers like, what could we do things. So could we get special lighting? Could we get automatic temperature controls? How can we track data? And he calls out a couple companies where they incentivized based on the amount of sleep. And I thought that was a really interesting, if you slept this much, then you accrued more days off. Or if you slept this much per night, then they gave you, a bonus or whatever that might be. I thought that was a really interesting take on this. I mean, I would just be happy with, a standard old, just like kindergarten, where it's like, hey, around 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, if everybody just wants to take a nap, like we're going to understand. Nobody's going to randomly knock on your door. But that's the incentive I would want.
Yeah, so that actually, the incentives, I think that comes from chapter 16, which I want to talk about this a little bit because this is basically his Martin Luther King style I have a dream speech about the different levels. So individuals, educational, interpersonal, organizational, public policy, and government, and then societal at large. And he's painting this picture of how our environments adapt around us to accommodate our circadian rhythms. And he's talking about these apps that are going to trigger these automations, and we're going to have these devices that we wear that are going to track all this stuff. And he's describing this, and the tone is kind of like, this is so wild and crazy and out there someday, but wouldn't this be incredible? And I'm hearing him describe that, and I'm thinking like, well, I already do a version of that, I already do a version of that, I already do a version of that.
Do you think it's just changed that much since 2017? Because that's the publication date. So, I mean, it hasn't
That
been...
was going to be my question, was how long ago was this published? And probably at 2017, that it's more, it has the effect that he is intending with this chapter. But I just want to call out here, like do what you can with what you have. You don't need the $300,000 light bulbs that he's describing
Yeah.
that eliminate all the blue light. You can get hue lights and they do the same thing. And yes, they are expensive, but they do the same thing.
Well, and if you read the
Like-
rest of his book, it's worth every penny because, you know, like, but poor sleep is going to kill me, right? It's going to, you know,
Right.
long term.
So this is something we don't do currently, but I've done this in the past. In our bedroom, we have lamps on either side of the bed, and we have hue lights there specifically because we don't want blasting light late at night as we're getting ready for bed. We'll turn off the big light in the bedroom. We'll turn on the hue lights to 30% or whatever, so we can see what we're doing still, but it's not, it's again, getting you ready to go to bed as we talked about in the pro show. But then with sleep cycles specifically, you can actually, and probably just baked into the Hue app now, you can use those Hue lights to kind of simulate a wake up. Like I had a Philips Hue light back in the day that was like gradually got brighter and brighter to simulate a sunrise and ease you up out of the deep sleep so you were awake by a certain time. Well, you can basically do that now on a schedule with these Hue bulbs. And, you know, a normal light bulb costs a couple bucks. Maybe a Hue light is, you can get different packs of them, but if you don't get the colored ones, maybe they're $30 or $40. So they're significantly more expensive, but they're a far cry from the crazy bulbs that he's describing. Maybe those are better and they lack some killer feature. I don't know. But again, there's an 80-20 to this stuff. And in terms of the devices, the Apple Watch is fine, but the Oura Ring is another one I've seen out there, which is kind of cool, which can do sleep tracking and a whole bunch of other stuff. And this stuff is not like just released within the last 6 months.
Yeah.
This stuff has been around for years. Maybe not in 2017, but I bet I've been using Sleep Cycle almost that long.
Yeah.
Like it's been a really long time. So that's kind of the general tone though, I think, when you talk about some of this healthcare industry adjacent stuff is like, well, there are these medical devices. I remember this with the family business, like that we worked with students who are lower functioning, and they had these augmentative communication devices, the boards with the buttons that you could press and they would speak. Thousands of dollars. And then the iPad came out. You could do the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a big fight like, well, that's not actually a medical device. Well, it does the same thing.
Yeah.
You could program the apps to do the exact same thing, but it didn't go through the channels, didn't have the formal stamp of approval. And it was always really frustrating because it's like, I'm a parent and I can't get insurance to pay for this thing. So I'm going to buy it out of pocket, but it's $8,000. Well, thank God now there's an iPad with this app that I can get for a couple $100 instead. And I remember actually going to Washington, D.C. and lobbying. I actually set up the appointments with the senators and representatives to talk about how we need to get the iPad approved as a medical device for this use, because it can do all the things that these other devices can do, but it's way more accessible.
Yeah.
You know, obviously we didn't make any progress there, but
Well, but I remember this conversation happening with like AirPods and hearing aids, right? Like
Mhm.
when they became, you know, what's the mode? Translucent mode? I forget what no, that's not the right word. But you know what I mean? Like where you can hear through, it's like a pass through kind of thing.
Yep.
And them saying about how like, well, this is essentially for certain people going to replace the $5,000 hearing aids with a $200, you know, product. So yeah, that's interesting. I hadn't thought about it from that perspective. All right, Mike, let's bring it around. Let's finish out the book. What other key takeaways do you have? What are your action items from this book? What are you going to do different?
Well, I don't have a single action item from this. I'll give you one thing that I am noodling on.
Okay.
So this is kind of like a half action item. Okay. So he does talk about caffeine and the half-life of caffeine, how that impacts sleep. I drink coffee in the morning and I drink coffee in the early afternoon. And I don't drink a lot, but I do drink more than my wife does, and maybe more than I need to.
Okay.
So I am thinking about and I'm not trying to like wean myself off to a point where like, oh, I'm only drinking this much coffee. Like that's not the goal. I drink coffee not because I need the caffeine, because I enjoy
Yeah.
coffee.
Okay.
Every once in a while, I go through a season where I'll fast for several days and I will completely cut out coffee and I don't have the headaches. I'm not addicted to the caffeine, but it probably still has a little bit bigger impact on me than I realize. So maybe that's just decreasing the amount of coffee that I have in the afternoon. Maybe it's, I start thinking about that a little bit more intentionally and I cut out that afternoon coffee altogether. Maybe it's instead of the coffee, I'm actually replacing that with a nap after lunch.
Yeah.
I don't know exactly, but it's something that I'm thinking about.
Okay. All right. Mine is basically I want to try to sleep 8 hours a night. So there's a pre-step to that one. And the pre-step to that one is I need to think about the plan and what are my commitments in the early morning. And then if these are my commitments in the early morning, what's the time I would need to go to bed and what needs to give? Because something's going to have to give. Like I'm not going to be able to go to bed that early. So do I need to bump the other activity? Do I need to take a season and just not do that activity? I need to think hard about that one. So my action item is going to be thinking hard about how do I actually get 8 hours of sleep every night? And then help me, because I can't remember if he actually said this specifically. If I would do like 6 hours at night and like a 2 hour nap, he's saying it's not the same because I'm still missing that REM sleep at the end, right? I need that 8 hour chunk-ish, the 8 hour chunk. Daggone it. I was hoping I could.
Theoretically, but I don't know. I feel like you kind of have to experiment and practice with this stuff.
Yeah.
So I would do an experiment, do one night where you get 6 hours and then 2 hours and see how you feel.
All right. So not a ton of action items out of this book. Let's go to style and rating. So it's my book. I'll go first. Here, I'm torn on this one. Like I'm really torn on this one because I think there are some gems in here. I think there's some gems hidden inside 380 pages. So some of the gems that I'll call out, right? He said, when sleep is abundant, minds flourish. When it's deficient, they don't. He calls out the fact that lack of sleep is a slow form of self-euthanasia. I mean, there are some of these gems in here where, and he backs it up with so much good research and credible research that you really want to listen. Like I really want to listen and take action on the things he says, and I want to prioritize sleep because there's one point he talks about diet, exercise, and then the third pillar is sleep, and we don't often talk about the third pillar. We talk about diet and exercise all the time, but we don't talk about that sleep pillar. So it's like there's so many of these gems that I come out and I go, man, I really like what's here, but it's just packaged in so much of what felt like I want to tell the world about all the cool research I've done over my 20, 30-year career, and I need an outlet for that, and I'm going to do that outlet in this book. And like that rubbed me in a way that just wasn't like I didn't like it. Rubbed me the wrong way in terms of I didn't think it was necessary. So that's not necessarily a knock on him or on the quality of the book. It's a knock on my liking of the book. So this is a gigantic disclaimer that said there are some really, really good gems in here that are packaged in a package that's what I think is way too large. And what I'm trying to figure out is how low does that knock my rating? Because if I come out with like a super low rating, you're going to think, oh, the book's not good at all. And it's like, no, that's not true. I think the book is good. I just would I recommend you read this book? No, I would not. Like I would not go to a bunch of people and say, hey, here's a great one, right? Go read Why You Sleep. But what I would recommend is let me tell you about why we sleep in 15 to 30 minutes and you're good. And I think you're going to be A-okay. So what I'm trying to figure out, Mike, and I'm trying to process verbally right now, like out loud, externally and verbally. I mean, I really think I'm at a 2.5 on this one. Am I allowed to do halves? I can't remember. Am I allowed to do halves?
You can do half.
Okay.
Yeah.
Like I'm at a 2.5. I sit right in the middle of it. Right in the middle of the 0 to 5, rating. So that's where I'm going to land. You're up.
All right. I'm going to rate it 3 stars because I'm not going to do halves. But that's just me personally, and because I want to use the stars in Obsidian as a property field, and he can't do a half star. So I agree with a lot of what you said. There's a lot of good information in this book. I don't think I really enjoyed it all that much. The subtitle, the title is Why We Sleep. Subtitle is Unlocking the Power of Sleep and Dreams. The subtitle should really be Scaring You to Sleep or something like that. Like, if you don't, all this bad stuff is going to happen to you. So knock it off and go to sleep.
You're really just killing yourself, right? Like that's the subtitle.
Yep. But I think that if you're Matthew Walker, this is almost like your business card, not just a book that you are writing to help people. I do think it probably can be helpful. And maybe that aggressive tone that he's got to take is just because this is, by the time you get someone to actually pick up a book on this, you really got to establish like, hey, pay attention. This is a really big deal. Again, my situation is a little bit different, so you don't have to do that with me, which is why I felt kind of ridiculous and very sensationalized for most of it. But the things that he's saying are not sensationalized. It's just a really big deal. He's done all of the research. I will say the research itself, I got bored with. Like, there's so many mentions to studies, and there's nothing like really sensational about a lot of the results. It's like, we did this study, we saw this percent improvement, we saw this percent degradation, and you hear that, 100 times, and it kind of starts to sound the same. But I'm not in the educational field or the medicinal fields that he's speaking to. So if you're a doctor, maybe like you could read that stuff all day and it's interesting to you. Like, I started to tune it out after a little bit. The other thing is that I feel like the style, he's a pretty good writer, but I empathize for him because it's really hard. Like, every single chapter, he has a single sentence at the beginning to try to grab you and hook you, which I feel like he does a pretty good job. And then immediately it goes into the research. It's almost like he knows I'm going to lose him when I start talking about the research. And I feel like he writes in a style that is very entertaining. But again, there's only so much you can do with the format that you've chosen and keep coming back to the research. So by the time you get to page 340, it's kind of like, okay, it hits different at the beginning than it does at the end. Again, the tone, not there's anything necessarily wrong with the tone, but just like the whole format of the book. I feel like if you're trying to pick up something that is what is it? The edutainment, like it's educational, but it's still kind of fun. Like, this is not that book.
Yeah, I would agree.
I don't know what that book is. I have not found a great book about sleep, even though it's really something that I pay very close attention to. So I don't know. Maybe I should write it.
Hey.
I don't have the research though. I like, if there's one guy to write a book on sleep, it's Matthew Walker.
I say just take his book and just make it more entertaining.
Sure. Yeah. I don't know. You could definitely get the gist of what he's talking about in the single chapter. That's what I told my son when I was talking about it yesterday. Like, there's some aha moments here about the teenagers' circadian rhythms being pushed back. He's like, oh, really? Interesting. Like, those are the kind of conversations I have with my kids. He actually is interested in this sort of stuff. But then, like, he's like, well, what do you think of it overall? I'm like, oh, it's probably like a 10-page blog post.
Yep. I told a guy this morning when I was talking about it, I was like, it's a 14-page PDF. Right. Like, and I literally said that same phrase. So it's funny that you said a 10-page blog post, because that was the way I described it too.
Yep. So 3 stars, decent. I don't know, not super entertaining, but if you really want to dive into the science of sleep, this is probably worth your time. But 340 pages, I mean, come on. This is a long book. This is not an easy read. Know what you're getting into.
Yeah, definitely. All right, so let's go ahead and put Why We Sleep on the shelf. Mike, you have the next book. So what are we doing for our next book?
I do, and I apologize. I already picked. I just railed on this one for being long, but the next one's long too.
But we have a full 2 weeks on this one, so
that's true. That's true. So the next one is Super Thinking by Gabriel Weinberg and Lauren McCann. This is one that was recommended to me a long time ago. And as I mentioned in the reading masterclass, usually when someone I respect recommends a book, I buy it immediately. So it's been on my bookshelf for a long time. But then I share an office at the co-working space with a designer for DuckDuckGo, and he had the book also. And I was like, oh, how'd you hear about that? Oh, Gabriel Weinberg is the CEO of DuckDuckGo. Oh, interesting. So I've got multiple recommendations for this now, but it's basically a big book on mental models. I started this last night. I think it's going to be a pretty easy read.
Good.
All the mental models, by the way, if you're taking notes on this, they're all listed in the order that they appear and then like the inside cover. So that may help you with your mind mapping or note taking.
Okay.
You definitely don't want to try to capture everything that sounds like it might be important with this.
Yeah.
It's essentially kind of like a reference work for mental models. So I think probably what we'll do is we'll this is broken out into different sections. We'll just pick some of our favorites from the different sections and talk about it that way. But I love me some mental models.
Awesome.
And this one so far is a good one.
Awesome. I'm excited for it. Then in 2 episodes from now, we are going to cover Scarcity Brain by Michael Easter. So that's my book. I've read a Michael Easter book before, The Comfort Crisis. And this one's his new one out, and it looks pretty good in terms of thinking about how your brain works and sort of the dopamine cycle and the recursive cycle of the way you think through different things. So that'll be the one 2 episodes from now. So feel free to pick those up if you're reading along with us, and we'll do Super Thinking by Gabriel Weinberg and Lauren McCann for the next one. Mike, do you have any gap books between now and the next episode?
I have a stack of books that I want to read as gap books, but I'm nervous to pick one for the having to read Super Thinking as well. Because again, that one is over 300 pages. It's a pretty big book. I want to make sure I have enough time to get through that. So that's what I'm focused on. If I am able to start a gap book, I will mention it next time.
Okay.
How about you?
So I said last time that Liminal Thinking was my gap book. I read maybe like 10 pages in Liminal Thinking, and I was like, oh, this is going to be good. I'm going to like this. Like, everything's going to be great. And then Why We Sleep just completely took over the rest of my time. So I'd like to keep Liminal Thinking on the gap book priority chain. We'll see if I have time with it with Super Thinking and how quickly I can work through Super Thinking. So Liminal Thinking would be the one that I still have there.
Awesome.
Well, that does it for another episode of Bookworm. We want to thank everybody for listening along. We want to thank you for reading along. If you want to know or want to hear more, we have a pro show. So in the pro show today, we talked about our bedtime routines. We talked about our bedtime routines before we try to go and get some good sleep. You can go figure out more and access the pro show at patreon.com/bookwormfm. So patreon.com/bookwormfm. If you're interested in that, that comes with not only the pro show, but the bootleg, a wallpaper. What else am I forgetting, Mike?
I think that's it. Yeah. We're going to do some members special episodes pretty soon, but we haven't scheduled those yet. Yeah. We're going to go through the 36 questions that we found in Super Communicators. And I think we might go back and talk about liminal thinking as well. So
sounds good.
Those will be in the pro feed for people who sign up for that. When you sign up for Patreon, it's $7 a month, and you get access to the feeds. You just plug them into your podcast catcher of choice and can download the episodes.
Wonderful. So we'll put Why We Sleep on the shelf. We'll get Super Thinking out, and we will prep for next time. So thanks, everybody, for listening.